I didn't understand a lot of what Moises said, but I heard Michael Jordan being mentioned. And this is an essay called Basketball and Poetry, the Two Richies. I hope it will not be Jordanesque, but it will be something that will try to take on the similarity between poetry at its best and basketball at its best, among other things. Basketball was my first love, or perhaps it was my religion, if religion can be defined as that which governs your life. As a teenager, I played almost every day, sometimes shoveling snow off the schoolyard court in order to do so. Sometimes I played in the dark, a distant streetlight, the only illumination. If there was no one to play with, I played by myself, imagining opponents were just practicing my shots. By the time I was 14, I was 5'11", and the only freshman to make the varsity high school team. But I remember the coach looking at my small feet and shaking his head. "You're not going to get any bigger," he said, and he was right. I set about into cultivating skills appropriate to someone my size, shooting, ball handling, and I thought basketball when I wasn't playing it. Since my mid-20s, I've written and thought poetry that way, a lover's way, at odd hours, my whole self, or as much of myself as I could bring to the task involved. Play for mortal stakes, Robert Frost called it, and often it's a kind of serious play that brings one closer to self and reality. And this is not always pleasurable. Basketball, on the other hand, served to delay my entry into the real world, which of course was part of why I loved it. I think if it hadn't been for Richie Schwartz and Butch Van Bredekoff's decision to play him instead of me as the shooting guard on the 1960 Hofstra College basketball team, I might have been able to delay such entry indefinitely. But after a good sophomore year in which I was the team's second high scorer, Richie Schwartz showed up and began for me a 2-year lesson, often humiliating, about limits. Richie Schwartz was good, pure and simple. But basketball is a game of relativities. The correct word is better. Schwartz was better than I. From the first time we covered each other in practice, this was evident. He could block my jump shot. He could steal the ball from me. The writing, as they say, was on the wall, and it wasn't poetry. If basketball offers you the possibility of transcendence, it more regularly offers you a sense of your limitations, though the two are somewhat intertwined. Every opponent presents to you a different set of attitudes, latitudes, or confinements. But basketball is a team game, and a good coach and good teammates can make use of your limitations, even free you from annoying defenders. No one could free me from Richie Schwartz. He was the only person who ever blocked my jump shot, by the way. Well, they did it all the time. Richie Schwartz turned me inward to where doubts are, and doubts, while good for the poet, are bad for the athlete. In retrospect, Schwartz turned me toward the examined life, which, as everyone knows, is where angst resides. I accepted as fully as I did the existential literature I was reading at the time. It's only the fool who denies that his jump shot has been cleanly blocked, or that he's suddenly empty-handed. You are what you do and don't do. Worse, it was also public. I didn't have any face-saving lies to tell. No, I had plenty, all of them transparent. In basketball, it's common to play with people better than you. To grow up in the schoolyards in Queens was to know something about hierarchy and pecking orders. I had sought out good players because they are the yardstick by which I could measure and sometimes exceed myself. But I had never before had to play every day against someone who so consistently prevented me from being effective. And that ineffectiveness carried over to game situations. Hesitant that entire year, 1960, I rarely played as well as I had the year before. The equivalent in poetry writing would be not just to know that Yeats is a great poet, obviously that's desirable, but to have the achievements of Yeats block your ability to write poetry every time you've tried. The poets who keep writing do so in the face of such greatness. If they were reasonable, they'd stop. There's much to be said for obsessiveness and stubbornness. Poets need to be somewhat driven in order to push forward. Talent isn't quite enough. I didn't let Richie Schwartz entirely defeat me. I just made some adjustments with how to live with my first love. There's always a Richie Schwartz out there, antithesis to your thesis. As the poet Robert Haas wrote in an epigraph to his book Praise, we asked the captain what course of action he proposed to take toward a beast so large, so terrifying, and unpredictable. He hesitated to answer, then judiciously, I think, said, I think I shall praise it. I may not have been as judicious as that captain, but Schwartz was a formidable player and good for the team. I cheered him from the bench, my heart healing a little each day. But it was basketball with and without Richie Schwartz that I had in mind when I began this, especially basketball's elan and its connection to writing poetry. As a former jump shooter with some ability, I remember what it was like to get in a rhythm, to become unstoppable, that feeling that the ball could not help but go in because you had entered the realm of magic, a place that was both yours and beyond you. I have a clear memory, even though the event took place over 30 years ago, now 40, I guess. I was playing in the Long Island Press League, which had teams composed of players like me. A combination of has-beens and almost-beens, a decent league, I used to think. I still see the box scores that appeared in the press the next day. Dunn, 20 field goals, 5 foul shots, 45 points, almost Jordan-esque, not quite. I had often scored 20 points or so, but never before had I scored more than 40. I missed very few shots that night and was aided by a childhood friend, a teammate. Another Richie, who recognized early that some kind of magic was occurring. He passed the ball to me at exactly the right moments, in exactly the right places, my places on the court. Such an evening wouldn't have happened without him. I could liken him now to my perfect reader, historically equipped and presently attuned to understand my best stuff. His name was Richie Goldstein, henceforth to be known as the Good Richie. I tell this story not to brag about my prowess, though I admit to a certain pride in the telling. I'm mostly interested in discussing what it means to be hot, those happy moments, to quote myself, when practice and talent metamorphose into a kind of ease. On that evening, I was better than myself. Every previous hour on a basketball court, my muscle memory, my ability, converged that evening with dream. In fact, I had visions of such an evening. Every kid who's ever played has had such visions. Unconscious, someone said afterward. That guy was unconscious. That I was and longed to be. Perhaps basketball and poetry have only a few things in common, but most important is the possibility of transcendence. The opposite is labor. In writing, every writer knows when he or she is laboring to achieve an effect. You want to get from here to there, but find yourself willing it, forcing it. The equivalent in basketball is aiming your shot, a kind of strained and usually ineffective purposefulness. What you want to be is in some kind of flow, each next moment a discovery. Unconscious, maybe, but more accurately a movement toward higher consciousness, of saying what you didn't know you could say, propelled by the mysteries of the process. The hot basketball player, however, has a distinct short-term advantage over the hot poet. He did it, everyone knows he did it, that the Nobel Committee need not meet to decide about it in private sessions. This is why scoring 45 points is more vivid in my memory than the writing and completion of any single poem, and why poets are often tormented. Thank Yes, they may write successful, brilliant poems, but so few others agree or even care that they did. The fans don't stream into the studios or the garrets. I think every poet needs two Richies, one to come up against, the other to act as a muse. The tradition in all its forbidding excellence is what the serious poet engages, consciously or unconsciously, every time he sits down to write. It can be as seminal as it is daunting. To have had a Richie Schwartz in my basketball life may have prepared me to score 45 points some years later. Certainly to have the good Richie on that magical night was to have an inspiriting agent. I almost said angel. I did it myself. That's the comment of the poet, insufficiently respectful of mystery, not to mention his forebears, a Donald Trump of a poet, I should say. I've always been pleased, though not surprised, that so many of the best basketball players are intelligent. They understand the demands of a given situation. They do with their abilities what is necessary for the team, much as a good poet learns not to dazzle unless it contributes to the entire poem. Lesser poets and lesser basketball players never seem to learn that lesson. Not to pass the ball to the open man, for example, has many corollaries in poetry writing, all of them equally self-indulgent. To love a line too much because you wrote it, even though it doesn't work in the poem, or to put in a poem something that happened to you, whether you've made a place for it or not. It's lovely to watch a team yield to the temporary brilliance of a particular player. A good team will always adjust to someone with a hot hand, will know that it's in their interest to get the ball to that person, as Richie Goldstein did in my case. Similarly, a poem might have to expand to accommodate an important discovery. The poet's job is always to find a livable home for what he's found himself saying or doing. If he can't, he needs to save the wonderful discovery for another occasion or abandon it entirely. Court sense, basketball pundits called it. I know some poets who don't have it. Wallace Stevens, in his poem on modern poetry, talks about a sudden rightness is wholly containing the mind, below which it cannot descend, beyond which it has no will to rise. When the net works, we play great moments such as Julius Erving's driving, swooping layup, or any of Michael Jordan's acrobatics. We have instances of sudden rightnesses, clearly recognizable. Announcers often loosely call these moments a kind of poetry, which may be accurate in the Stevens sense, utterly sufficient. I worry about such locutions in our culture, which so often trivializes poetry. Too many poems are reduced by their readers to a single meaning, capsulized into catchphrases, distilled into information. Poetry's sudden rightness exists within larger contexts and are right because of what precedes and what follows them. They may be extractable, but at a cost. Here, basketball and its quick pleasures are part of a national problem, the short attention span, the quick, uncontemplative take. Poems are often demanding because they're trying to be equal to the complexities of the world and how it feels to be alive in it. I've learned something about sudden rightnesses from basketball as well as from poetry. But poetry alone has slowed me down, taught me patience and the rewards of contemplation. There are reasons why people don't exchange high fives in libraries. Poetry teaches you to say yes quietly, and at its best doesn't let you escape from experience, from the hard business of living. To be a poetry fan, you have to be prepared to wince, to have some of your shibboleths subverted. If you're a true fan, nothing again will ever be satisfactorily reduced to the thrill of victory, the agony of defeat. Works of art, as Camus reminded us, are not born in flashes of the imagination, but in daily fidelity. Now I only play basketball with my brother. I'll find the page soon. Here we go, thank you. I only play basketball when my brother comes to visit, maybe 3 times a year. Out of old habit, we get the ball, go to the schoolyard and play one-on-one. He's 58, 3 years younger than I, and he almost always wins. Our abilities are so comic that we hold and bump a lot. And there's not a move either of us has that the other hasn't seen 1,000 times. What to make of a diminished thing, Frost says. Indeed. I like to think of Richie Swartz this way, maybe with a bum leg, fat, out in some schoolyard, just trying to keep something that was good and felt good intact. Who knows, maybe he hasn't lost a step, as Odysseus never does in rereadings. After all, he's Richie Swartz. Whatever his condition, something of his transcendent past must come back to him. Sweet moves and the ball in the hole. Nothing like it. Well, almost nothing. It's something you don't forget, and with luck, by the time you're 50, you've replaced it with something else, or can settle for the vicarious. Without luck, God knows, those old battlefield stories are legendary. My brother and I play until we're exhausted, a stage soon reached. Each of us has usually made at least one shot that brings back a semblance of the old powers. 2 shots can create delusions of a major order. At dinner, we're likely to replay these moments. Our wives exchange the glances of grown-ups bemused by their children. But neither of them has ever corkscrewed into the paint, double-clutched, and kissed the ball just right off the backboard. It may not matter as much that my voice is so bad tonight because you can read the translations.